At some point, really soon, SpaceX is going to give us a show that is something beyond this incredibly awesome animation. Something real and something that we can analyze. It's going to happen soon, I promise, really. And so does just about every other space channel. But in the meantime, there are so many other things that we need to talk about, things that I hadn't even heard of. For example, just a couple of months ago, an organization called the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, which includes organizations like NASA all the way down to the Vietnam Space Center, and yes, indeed, that does exist. 24 different member nations came out with a roadmap for the exploration of the moon and the solar system. Did you hear about that? I didn't. And this roadmap includes details about how every member nation is going to contribute towards the exploration of the moon, man's permanent colonization of the moon, and our eventual expansion to Mars, and how every bit of this roadmap pertains to our eventual colonization of the red planet. It's really very exciting. And some of the more exciting things include this pressurized rover from Toyota provided by the Japanese Space Agency, a rover designed to carry astronauts across the lunar surface for a tremendous distance and to maintain them for over a month on their own. And just about every bit of this plan, from the rover to the habitation domes to the in situ resource utilization systems to just about everything else that this plan has in mind for the moon, is designed to also be used on Mars, whether it be protection from radiation or managing the dangerous regolith on the red planet, which also can be a problem on the moon. All sorts of things built into this plan that are designed to make our eventual journey to Mars a successful one. Does this sound exciting? Are you wondering why you haven't heard about this plan yet? Or at least I haven't? Well, get ready for a special 2-part episode of The Angry Astronaut that covers this plan in great detail, and it starts right now. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Angry Astronaut. So, we continue to wait for SN8 to make its historic flight. We continue to wait and hope that it's going to be as successful as possible. And as we continue to wait, I have decided to continue talking about things other than the Starship. I promise to resume my coverage of the Starship as soon as I think that there's something to cover. Again, not to say that there's nothing going on in Boca Chica. There is, but I think the most definitive things that are going to happen in regards to the Starship are going to take place after the hop and after we get a chance to see what happens with the hop. So, all of that having been said, I have done a little bit of research recently, and I came across, as I mentioned in the intro, a plan, a roadmap to the exploration of the solar system, starting with the moon, that was laid out by no less than 24 different space agencies. 24 of them who met just a few months ago came out with this roadmap, a revised roadmap, actually. They've met a number of times over the years. This was done with almost no fanfare, and yet it's a hell of a plan. It includes everything that every nation and every space agency is currently doing, at least when it comes to the moon. Every probe, every robot, and every manned mission from every nation. It doesn't really include much from SpaceX, aside from what SpaceX is doing in conjunction with Artemis, but nevertheless, it is a very comprehensive plan. It is so comprehensive that it's going to take me 2 episodes in order to fully cover it. But I think that it's worth it because it's really detailed and it describes not only how we're going to establish ourselves on the moon, how we're going to go to the moon to stay, but how every piece of this plan fits in with man's colonization of Mars as well. It's an amazing thing. I can't believe it hasn't gotten any coverage. It really pisses me off. And I have a feeling the reason it doesn't get much coverage is because it's non-binding. None of these 24 space agencies are obligated to do any of these things as far as their governments are concerned. This is not a treaty. This is not the Artemis Accords or anything like that. And so, therefore, it's very unlikely to happen. But what an awesome thing it would be if it did. And so I'm going to describe this to you in detail, step by step, and what it means to the moon and to Mars and to man's first steps out into the solar system. And we're going to get started on that right now. The ISECG is comprised of space agencies that you would never think would collaborate on anything. They include the Brazilian Space Agency, the Australian Space Agency, the Italian and French space agencies, the China National Space Administration, Canadian Space Agency, German Aerospace Center, the ESA. There's a Thailand Space Agency, believe it or not, the Indian Space Agency, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA, the Koreans, Luxembourg, NASA, of course, the Norwegian Space Agency, the Polish Space Agency, the Romanian Space Agency, the Russians, of course, the Ukraine, the Swiss, the United Arab Emirates, and finally the United Kingdom. Now, this organization's roadmap is based on the assumption that every one of these space agencies is going to work together in concert to colonize the moon, or at least establish a permanent human presence there, with the ultimate objective of establishing a presence on Mars as well. And instead of doing this chronologically, I'm going to talk about it line item by line item. And let's start off with one of the more interesting line items, which is the rover. The plan calls for an unpressurized rover to begin with, to provide transportation on the lunar surface for 2 suited crew for a distance of at least 2 kilometers. And as you can see, it's compact. But this is just a precursor for a much more ambitious pressurized rover to be provided by the Japanese Space Agency and Toyota. Some of you may have heard of this thing, but it is incredible. Using a combination of solar power and hydrogen fuel cells, this thing can travel an unbelievable 6,200 miles for its mission, and it has 459 cubic feet worth of living space for 2 astronauts, or 4 if necessary. It's 7 inches longer than a double cab Tundra pickup, and is as tall as 2 Tundras stacked on top of each other. Plus, it's about 30% wider than a US highway lane. Why is it so huge? Because it's supposed to be used for habitation as well as transport. The plan calls for a rover that is capable of providing habitation for 2 crew members for up to 42 days on the lunar surface and 600 kilometers worth of range, or 400 miles per mission. Why so ambitious? Because the assumption is that the multiple bases or landing sites on the moon, and especially on Mars, are going to be separated by a considerable distance. Therefore, you're going to need a lot of range, and you're going to need a habitation rover that can sustain its crew for a long period of time if it's to be successful. But even though this rover runs off of hydrogen and solar power, both of which are available on the moon, the plan calls for a slow expansion, not a huge base like this, although this is the long-term goal, but rather a step-by-step process of colonizing the moon, starting off small and getting a whole lot bigger. So when it comes to topics like in situ production of liquid oxygen and hydrogen and other fuel sources and things that we're going to need not only on the moon but also to go to Mars, these things start in phase 1 of the plan, as you can see here. The plan calls for a subscale version of a full-scale liquid oxygen in situ production plant that will generate 1% of the oxygen needed both for fuel and for long-term human habitation on the lunar surface. Only when the principles and the technology of this in situ plant are proven will we move on to later phases. And by the way, these later phases also include the use of nuclear power, which is going to be incredibly important not only on the moon, but also on Mars. And once these technologies have been proven, their application on Mars is obvious. Long-distance rovers to travel from settlement to settlement or to in situ production plants for hydrogen or oxygen, water, whatever a settlement might need, and also the fuel that they might require. All of these things can be proven on the moon and then put into practice on Mars. And not only that, nuclear power, of course, can also be tested on the moon, and once it's proven to be safe and effective, used on Mars as well, because it's going to be absolutely essential to have an alternate power source during the long Martian dust storms that can sometimes persist for as long as a year. The plan is also very specific when it comes to human landers. They should be completely reusable, they should carry a crew of 4, and they should be able to operate off of 50 tons worth of lunar-produced propellant per year. Now, something that's capable of doing all of these things is, you guessed it, the Dynetics lander. No other lander that's currently being proposed is both reusable and capable of operating multiple missions off of just 50 tons worth of propellant per year. But while the Alpaca might prove to be ideal for the initial human missions and perhaps small-scale cargo deliveries to the moon, future cargo missions are something else entirely. A key objective of the plan is to demonstrate a range of cargo delivery capabilities on the lunar surface for large surface elements and logistics. Quote, as much cargo capability as possible is desired, and the amount is a minimum of 9 tons and preferably more, which can be easily delivered by the lunar Starship and not much of anything else. And speaking of SpaceX, another key objective is to achieve commercially led sustainable, as in diminishing reliance on governments and their economic activities on the moon, with new commercial arrangements being essential. In other words, more private investment, less government. So what we have here is an international plan that encourages the commercialization of the moon, making use of the enormous amount of resources that exist on our satellite, and to have every space agency on the planet make some kind of contribution. But what are these contributions? Well, given that I've already put out a lot of videos about what these guys intend to do, I think we should move on to less well-known space agencies, such as the Australian Space Agency. Bet you didn't even know they existed. And they are particularly focused on robotics, which are going to be extremely important, not only in terms of rovers and robotic exploration of the moon's surface, but also the automated construction of habitation structures before humans even arrive on the moon. And then we have Thailand. Yes, indeed, they too have a space initiative specifically focused on detecting resources from space. Currently detecting resources in Thailand, but they intend to use those same technologies to find resources on the moon as well, including metallic resources, water ice, and other things vital to human settlement. And speaking of resources, we have Luxembourg. Yes, this tiny country may be small on size, but is large on investment. They've been very interested in the exploitation of outer space, such as the moon and asteroid mining for some time, and expressed in this specific plan their desire to partner with commercial agencies to exploit the resources of the solar system and make a profit. And then we have the Polish Space Agency, who intends to contribute robotic sensor and lander missions to the overall plan. And this isn't just a bunch of talk. These folks came in second place in what was called the European Rover competition. And this little robot is not your typical rover designed for its own research, but rather also to repair other pieces of equipment that might be in the field that humans don't have access to reactivate equipment should it become faulty or need adjusting, or what happens if your multi-million-dollar piece of equipment gets unplugged? Well, they have a solution to this as well. And whoever thought of this possibility? Well, they did. A better-known partner is the Indian Space Research Organization, and they've been involved in all kinds of space activities, including the manned exploration of low Earth orbit at the very least. Unfortunately, their Chandrayaan-2 mission, if I'm pronouncing that right, failed, at least the rover did back in July of 2019, but they're not giving up. If successful, India will only be the fourth country to successfully set a probe on the surface of the moon, and that probe and its attached rover will provide us with further scientific information about the satellite that we intend to colonize, along with testing new types of technologies designed to survive the long lunar night. The Chandrayaan-3 mission, if successful, will prove to be yet another piece in this roadmap to the colonization of the solar system that so few people know about. And for their part, the Japanese are not restricting themselves to Toyota Land Cruisers on the moon. On the contrary, they have a mission in the next few years that may find the human species a whole new location for a moon base. The mission is called SLIM, and it's designed to put the Japanese probe within 100 meters of its objective using facial recognition software. By way of comparison, the Apollo landers judged their landing by 20 kilometers or so, and they regarded that as being pretty accurate. The probe will set down very precisely at the entrance of a lunar lava tube called Marius Hills Hole. Unlike most of the lunar landers recently, this one is not setting down at the South Pole, but rather at the entrance of a lava tube in the hopes that, like Martian lava tubes, it might have water ice sufficient to support a human colony. If so, it will expand our ability to colonize the moon tremendously, and it too is on the overall plan. And as you can see, there's a whole lot more about this roadmap that I haven't even touched on yet. So I'm going to have to wait until a second part to describe the rest, and we'll see if SN8 launches in the meantime. But I'll be working on a second video to this amazing roadmap to our colonization of the solar system, and in the meantime, stay angry about space!